Hey, welcome to part 2 of the beginning airbrush series, and we're going to talk about Workspace and paints. Okay, when you get an airbrush setup, you have to be very careful about where you're spraying. The fumes can really build up in a small room and choke you to death almost, I guess you could say. What I do is I take a box fan, since I work next to my window here, open the window, put the box fan facing the fan out, okay, so that sucks the air out, and I spray right next to it, and that usually works for me. Now there's other options out there like getting an airbrush spray booth, and those can cost you some money there too. As you can see here, there's some spray booths that are movable and mobile, and there's some that are really heavy and you have to stick in one spot. There's a lot of different setups to this. You can even build your own spray booth. Okay, if you check YouTube and you go and you type in DIY spray booth, you'll see a lot of videos about how to build a spray booth, from very simple to very complex. A simple way of doing it is just getting one of those tubs that you get at the office supply store, cut out the back and put some computer fans into it, and that is actually kind of a cool way of doing it, because all you do is plug in the fans into a PC power supply, and then you'll have your power supply right there to power your fans. Now when you do that type of do-it-yourself, one of the most important things is getting the right fan. Okay, you have to get a fan that pulls enough air out to pull the fumes out. Okay, not only that, you might have to watch out about getting certain types of fan. There's some fans that have the wires in the middle of the fan there, and it could cause sparks, so you're shooting fumes through that fan, so you might have problems where it might spark and start a fire or something, so you have to be very careful about that. I've heard horror stories about that, but I've never actually seen it or had anyone actually prove that. Okay, there are some people out there that use a fan that has those wires in it, and they do okay by it. Okay, most of the time people use, a lot of times in this hobby, acrylic paints is the way to go. And acrylic paints, there's a less chance of it sparking and going on fire. Now, for more complex do-it-yourself type of spray booth, I'm going to direct you over to Bad Grendel's. Okay, he has a 8-part series about how he built his spray booth. Now he went all out. He got plywood, and he researched fans and stuff. So if you ever want to make a do-it-yourself spray booth, watch that video. He had a big discussion. I mean, we talked about it on Scale Model Addict and with a lot of other people, and he actually goes through about his decisions and stuff. So it's a really cool video series to watch. I'll link it below, okay, on my comments, on my description for the video. Okay, now let's talk about paints. Dun dun dun. Okay, now this is a huge subject. Everyone has their own preference type of paints that they want to airbrush with, and stuff like that. Now let's just drill down the basics. Let's just throw all that crap out of the window, okay, and let's talk about the paints, and any paint. Okay, you can use any paint to shoot through an airbrush as long as you can thin it at the right ratio, as long as it's thin enough to go through the airbrush. Okay, when you load the airbrush with paint and paint goes out and it shoots through the airbrush, it goes through a really fine needle here in the tip of the airbrush. Okay, that paint has to be thin enough to get out of that tip, okay, without clogging it up. If the paint's too thick, the pigments will clog up your airbrush, and you're going to end up taking it apart and cleaning it out really, really nicely and go again. Okay, so it's going to take a little finesse, and it is a little, in a way it's an art. Okay, you have to get the right ratios. Now the type of paint, you could, like I said, you can shoot anything through airbrush. I even shoot inks. I even shoot washes, as long as it's thin enough, through my airbrush. You could even mix pigments into a water form and shoot that through an airbrush. You can pretty much shoot anything through an airbrush. If my mother was thin enough, I'd shoot her through an airbrush. So now the type of paints. And this is where you get more of a debate. People have their own preference of paint. I prefer Vallejo and Tamiya paints. Okay, someone asked earlier, which you've seen, if you can shoot GW paints through an airbrush. Yes, you can, as long as you get the thinning ratio right. This is the problem with GW, is that GW paints is really odd to thin. You have to get it perfectly right. There are people that have no problems doing it. They figured it out and what the thinning ratio is for a certain type of paint and the color of the paint on the GW line, and shoot it through the airbrush. So yes, you can use GW paints to shoot thin airbrush. Would I suggest it? No, not really. Because I just my experience about shooting GW through airbrush, I've had a lot of troubles with it, and I've done it before though, and I got the ratio right. It just doesn't come out like Tamiya or Vallejo Paints. Okay, now Vallejo Paints, there's a really cool line in Vallejo called Air Color, which is made specifically for shooting through an airbrush. It's already pre-thinned, and you can just drop it out of the bottle and shoot through it. The other line is the Game Color line. Really easy to thin for the Game Color line. 1-to-1 ratio, and most of the times 1-to-1 ratio, and it goes right through your airbrush. Model Color, different story. When I first switched to Vallejo Paints, I had so much trouble with the Model Color line. Different colors have different pigment ratios, it seems like. So not every single color in the Model Color line uses the same ratio. So I usually start at 1-to-10. If it's too thick, I put more thinner into it, and then if it's too thin, I put more paint into it. Okay, but it's a lot adjusting. Like for example, I know if I wanted to shoot Model Color Black through it in this batch, okay, for this bottle, I have to do about a 1-to-20. Okay, if I bought a new bottle, that might change, because the Model Color line is really odd. I'm not quite sure why it does that. Some other colors only need 1-to-5, some colors only need a 1-to-10. So a lot of experimenting with the Model Color line. Okay, the other paint that I would suggest is Tamiya Paints. Okay, and I still use Tamiya Paints along with my Vallejo Paint. Tamiya Paints, usually most of the time throughout the whole line, you can just do a 1-to-1 ratio a mix there. Again, for GW, it's tricky. You'll have to experiment with that. So it's all about getting the thinning right. Now, the types of thinning medium depends on the type of paint you use. If you're going to use enamel paints, you're going to have to use enamel thinner. If you use lacquer paints, you're going to have to use lacquer thinner. And then for acrylic, you can actually use the acrylics, and you have a lot more choices here. For acrylics, for example, I know me and Les at Awesome Paint Job, we mix with Windex for using in Vallejo. The other thing you could do is using a little concoction that you can mix up for Vallejo paints. It's 10 parts Vallejo airbrush cleaner and 2 parts of Vallejo thinner. Okay, but that gets a little expensive to use it as a thinning medium. You can also use water, distilled water. Always use distilled water, because that way you don't get that nasty minerals that you get from the faucet into your paint. For Tamiya, I usually thin with alcohol or Tamiya Thinners. Now, Tamiya has their acrylic thinner, and they have their lacquer thinner. I actually use their lacquer thinner most of the time to thin Tamiya paints, and that's a discussion on its own there, why I would do that. For GW, I believe water, you should only stick to water. I think someone mentioned alcohol too, but that's something you're going to have to check on the net. Now, I did mention apple barrel paints or Dick Blick's acrylic, generic paints and stuff, and why you're wondering why I would shoot that type of paint through my airbrush. And once you got the thinning done, you got the color, you use the cheap paints to paint terrain. Okay, now there's a lot of terrain builders out there that sometimes use aerosol cans and stuff and try to get paint on, and if you know what I'm talking about, if you spray the stuff on the foam, it'll melt the foam. Alright, I know terrain builders out there have come into that problem. Using acrylics and using your airbrush, you get the same type of effect and the same ease to get your terrain painted without the worry about having it melt on you. Okay, and that is a great reason why to get an airbrush for terrain building. Okay, that's it for this video. Remember, if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, post them in the comments, mail me, or catch me on event, or give me a call. That's it. Do all the other cool stuff. Subscribe, like, all that YouTube bullshit, and I'll see you out there. For more tutorial videos on how to paint your figures, check out Les's channel at Awesome Paint Job. For cool terrain tips and tutorials, check out Chris at Terrain Noob.